Well, we're back in the studio today for another session of Filtering the Noise with ATP Enable. And with me today, I'm very privileged, we've got Richard Nisbett from ATP Enable. Richard and the team are really shaking up the world of SIM and protected SIMs. Richard, why don't you just, for the audience, and I know you're on all these podcasts, so why don't you just give us a short introduction of who you are and some of the great work that you're doing?
Yeah, of course, Graham. So I'm Richard. I'm one of the co-founders and directors at ATP Enable. We manage everything secure SIM, whether that's an IoT devices, tablets, those in care homes and facilities, the digitally excluded, and even to children and minors.
Fantastic. And join us today. We've got the famous Jessica Flack. Jess Flack.
Infamous.
Infamous, I don't know. It all depends who you speak to. So I have here that you are the Digital Inclusion Lead Officer for Essex County Council. You're a social value champion. You are a Gen Z advocate and a general speaker. Wow, that's a lot to fit in, isn't it?
And I wrote it all myself. Yeah.
Jess, why don't you just give us a little bit of a background to you and how you got to be doing what you're doing today?
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
That's
guys.
all right. It's really great to have you
here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm Jess Flack. I'm the Digital Inclusion Lead Officer for Essex County Council. I've been doing the role for a couple of years now, but prior to that, I worked in skills commissioning for the council. My background and golden thread has always been around helping people, employability. So I've done some teaching, and I came into this role because I was the sort of technical lead or the digital lead for the skills commissioning piece. And I find this absolutely fascinating, and being able to support people on the front line with getting online is one of my absolute favourite things to do.
Well, fantastic. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in the podcast today. But before we start, we have to talk about product placement.
The elephant in the room.
The elephant in the room. What is Digital Essex? Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and that initiative?
Yeah, so Digital Essex is the team that I work for, an incredible group of people, really driven. We focus on connectivity, transformation, that's digital transformation and digital inclusion. And I am biased because they're an amazing team, but we do incredible things all across Essex. But we also share. We're quite unusual that we share support, best practice advice with the rest of the local authorities across the UK. And we're open and honest about doing that. So drop us a DM, guys.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure you'll be sharing this podcast. So this session today is aptly entitled by myself, actually, and I've called it The People Making Change Happen. And that's who I see in front of me right now, people who are actually passionate about digital inclusion, making change happen. So first of all, I want to talk about, so when it comes to online child safety and digital inclusion, what are some of the root issues? Richard, what are you seeing around that?
I mean, there's a few key areas, really. One of them is access to digital devices. They may not have a laptop, may not have a phone, a tablet. If they've got the device, they may not have the required connectivity. I think the statistic was 27% of families in the UK are struggling to afford broadband services, let alone SIMs as well, but just physical internet in terms of being at home. And even if you've got those, it's sometimes as well potentially the digital skills. You may have a device, it's the parents may not have the digital skills to teach the child, so it becomes a fairly redundant device because it's sitting there. And in terms of if you were able to tick those three boxes and you've got a device and you've got the skills and you've got the access, the other piece around specifically that for minors and children is about education. It's very, very difficult. You can't hover above your children watching what they're doing all day, every day on a tablet, on a device. So there are preventions in place, there are settings, there are things out there. It's just not enough, which is hence what we're looking to do and change.
Yeah, absolutely. And the product that you supply in the marketplace. So Jess, going to come to you because this is your subject.
How long have we got?
Yeah, this is what you're passionate about.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Let's talk about digital inclusion. Let's get it from your perspective, and let's talk about it, some of the work that you're doing within the council.
Okay, so Essex County Council, Digital Essex team, we focus on access, affordability and adoption of skills. We recognise that you can't just give someone a device and fix everything. That doesn't work. So skills is a key piece. Affordability, so people can not necessarily afford connection, broadband, mobile, all of those types of things. So we try and address those three things. One of the sort of big difficult pieces that we have in this space is that we make assumptions. we make huge assumptions that everybody has access to this or they're all right. So they are young people, they'll be able to do everything. Our young people are mobile first. Yeah. So laptops, computers will be more alien to them. And if they have poor access to those things in school, then they're going to really struggle for the rest of their lives in terms of being able to be employable and have the right level of skill for work.
I think that even that comes across in usage. I don't know about, we've spoken about kids and stuff before the podcast, but mine touch the telly and the laptop because they're so used to touch screen. They're trying to scroll on the TV. No. You've got to use a remote. But what I find fascinating, which again is probably showing age, is they talk to it. They've found the speaker button. So they're not typing now on iPads and tablets and to TVs, so Sky. They just hold the button and bluey, and they can request it through audio now. It's just amazing how they've become so used to having that touchscreen that they expect it on everything. So yeah,
but it's limbic. It's part of, if we think about the emotional impacts that we got, our limbic development as human beings.
Yeah. So
this period in time, we didn't, when I was growing up, I didn't have access to any of that. So my emotional engagements were coming from other things. But we have to recognise that younger people today, at very key times in their life, this will be limbic to them. This, to know those skills, to understand that technology, as you said, Jess, and to be relevant in the future, and to feel comfortable about it, I guess. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think some of the difficulties lie around the fact that we are a generation now coming through, even more so than previously, where quick first is correct is what we want. We want everything now. So if something's hard, like setting parental control things on things and setting up a laptop, we won't bother. No. I do the same thing, to be fair. I leave it to my husband, bless him. So we've got these difficulties there, and unfortunately what's happening is we've got an onus placed on parents, carers, to do all of this stuff with little in the way of infrastructure behind that. So we can give someone a device, and what happened is over COVID, we were providing devices by the millions in the UK to disadvantaged families, and even families that weren't disadvantaged but just didn't have a device because they hadn't needed one before. We'd drop them off on the doorstep with our masks on, we'd walk away, and then we'd find out later that device had gone in a drawer because the parents and carers didn't know how to operate them. So the concept around this being an easy fix is absolutely not true, and we really need to talk about putting infrastructure behind some of the things that we're asking for. So children's safety, we put the onus of that on parents and carers, and rightfully so in some respects, but we're not teaching the parents and carers to do this. So there's a really great stat from the Minimum Digital Living Standard, which came out from Good Things Foundation a little while ago, that 45% of households across the UK with children don't have the skills, the access, all of those things required to be at the basic Minimum Digital Living Standard.
Wow, 45%.
45%. So when we look at that, and then we look at the way that we're trying to push the UK as this leading digital nation, you're going to have these difficulties where we've got people who aren't even at the bottom rung of that ladder yet. So it's big. It's a big issue. I like big issues that I can get my teeth into. So I will continue to kind of do what we're trying to do. But yeah, it's so much bigger than what people conceive it to be.
And it's important, I think, that you mentioned infrastructure. So as Jess said about the pandemic, there was we were engaged a lot with the schools during the pandemic, and a lot of them were getting donated devices, and either the access wasn't at home for the child, so it was a redundant device to provide it to them. There's a £200, £300, £400 laptop. We've done our best, there you go, but they had no access to it. But the other side was that the security and filter profiling wasn't applied. So they were going to give a device and just hope that what they did was the right thing, and they didn't eventually actually end up putting a child in harm's way by giving them access at home in an isolated environment where they didn't have it before. And we've spoken about this again before the podcast today, that unfortunately that demographic, the socioeconomic disadvantaged, are the most likely to be coerced and kind of enticed into these sorts of dark side of the internet.
Yeah, I got this vision, when you were just talking to me about that, and you're saying, right, okay, because the hardware gets dropped off and they don't have access, so they don't have the skills. It's almost like you need to be putting a manual a printed manual on top
Yeah.
of the laptop and saying, you are responsible for what is accessed on this computer. This is now what you have to do. Because if you're saying they've not got access, how do they start if they don't know what to do when you switch it on? It's almost like we were talking earlier. It's almost like you need those traditional forms of communication to say, there's the brochure, there's the 10-point action
That's
plan.
right, because where would you usually send somebody for help? Online.
Absolutely, yeah. And in
Yeah.
my mind, I'm thinking,
chatbot. You know,
Yeah.
go and chat-
Yeah, go and
to a
chat
bot.
to that.
use this computer, get online. Well, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
and that's a big challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
So obviously, getting that equipment allocated. Let's just talk about some of the funds that are available. Let's just talk about the operation that's behind that fuels that. So we were talking earlier, weren't we, about the National Databank, which has the Good Thing Foundation attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a fund, and correct me if I'm wrong, around about £8 million.
Yeah.
Around
yeah.
about that. No, Richard, I think you were and I were talking about that earlier in the week. So just talk to me about that. Let's just talk about that and about the allocation of that and what that fund does.
Okay. So Good Things Foundation do lots of different things. They're one of the leading charities in this space. The other is Digital Poverty Alliance, of course. I'm actually a regional ambassador for the Good Things Foundation.
Okay.
They work with community volunteering services and charities and support them in enabling digital inclusion initiatives happen across the UK. One of the things they do is the National Databank, which is free SIM cards for those who are eligible. And that's usually 18 plus, struggling to get online, universal credits, those types of things. So they provide this through things like community volunteering services, charities, libraries do it as well.
Okay.
Food banks are offering them. There's 3 types of SIM cards, and effectively somebody can come in and show that they're struggling and then have access to free data for a period of time. So between 6 and 12 months. It is a fantastic opportunity, but some of the times I feel like it's a little bit of a sticking plaster because you're giving somebody access to something and then probably at some point you're going to take it away again. So if we're really trying to move the needle on digital inclusion, the sticking plaster will only ever be temporary.
Yeah.
And it's going to leave a rash.
Yeah.
So the ointment for me, if we're looking at analogies,
I like
is going to be, well, we need to be looking at the fact that actually digital and access to digital should be our 4th utility. Mm-hmm. That's the real thing that we should be talking about.
That's an interesting view.
So digital equity through it being the 4th utility. And everything else that comes with that's access to devices too. I mean, when have you ever been able to go into a store and get free, impartial advice on your laptop suddenly not working for you?
Probably a number of years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Without being sold something,
Yeah.
without being worried that the person behind the desk, who bless them's working on commission, you know it, they know it, they're going to try and sell you something that you don't necessarily want, that's out of your price point, and you leave frustrated. So even just yesterday, we were working, my lovely apprentice Amina, who's sitting with us today, we were working in a church in Brentwood, and a lady came to us and said, "I'm so glad you're here. I went to a shop and they were going to charge me £40 to look at my laptop. All she wanted to do was move some photos from one thing to another."
Yeah.
So it doesn't exist.
Right.
So that there's so much going on around this space. So yes, the National Databank is a fantastic support to a point, but there is a bigger picture behind that we need to really address.
And I think 8 million sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But in terms of, I think the statistic for children, and Jess has probably got more in terms of the wider digitally excluded in the UK, it's 1.7 million children.
Yeah.
Divide 8 million by the number of children in the UK, that's not a lot for device, for connection, for training, for skills. But we've also got to remember that it's not just, in terms of that being the next generation, that's a definite passionate project for mine and focus, but it's the older generation in which I think you talk about the digital skills and the frustration in terms of advice on using devices. Mum was recently just retired, bless her, and when it went to COVID and it was working from home and she was working for a local soliciting firm, she got onto Teams. not used Teams in her 40 odd years of sorry, Mum, 40 odd years of
20,
employment.
20.
Sorry, 20 years, and it was an absolute panic and a call to me, and couldn't get a speaker to work. Fortunately, the decision then came. Do you know what? It was great working with the girls because we were in the office, but that panic and lack of understanding, not through any intelligence stuff, but just digital skills. She's got a phone, she can use the phone, but Teams and importing and cloud, and these are nervous words that an age group that's never had to deal with it before, where banks are closing and post offices are closing and everything's got to be done online. That the skills piece is a huge part as well. And we were really proud that during the pandemic we actually supplied all of the 11,000 SIMs to the care homes. So it gave, during the pandemic, the ability for them to still have GP appointments and remain secure in their care homes and not having to leave as we were at the height of the pandemic. And it was a really, really well thought out, executed project. The problem was, and going back to Jess's point, is after 12 months it stopped. And so they couldn't then FaceTime family again, and they couldn't do this, and they have to now leave their care home again to go into. We need to move into a digital permanent environment, but for that needs funding.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've got loads of questions that aren't even on my script now. So, because Richard, let's bring this to the point where, Jesse, you're saying you're distributing this hardware, and I would imagine some of that's being contributed by the big manufacturers. Are they donating devices or recycled devices? Is that making good cost-effective use, or is it always new product you're distributing?
So this is a really good question. Another part of what the Good Things Foundation do is they have a device bank. It's a national device bank. But there are difficulties in accessing some of the work that they do there, because I'll give you an example. Our fantastic counsellor, who's an advocate for what we do, we work in Essex. So if we ask for local businesses to donate into a device bank, and that device bank can't get those devices back out to Essex, but instead it goes to Coventry or somewhere else, that's a super difficult conversation to have, right? So we've kind of created our own thing. For the moment, Good Things are working on that at the moment, but we've created our own thing at the moment where we can ask businesses to donate in. Some of it is older devices that get wiped and then are refurbed, which is great. That's your carbon footprint, all of that.
Great use.
So I think
circular economy.
1,000 refurb devices is enough to take 800 cars off a road for a year, I think is the right thing. So that's fantastic. But we also had to create our own fund around this as well. So buying refurb devices and having them available. The funding is a very interesting question to sort of discuss there. But I'd love to talk about things like residual value contracts. Do you know about that? No? So there's a whole thing about contracts that you can have for devices. I'd love schools to know about this a little bit more. So you can have a contract where basically all your devices that come through, when they're end of life, you retain some of the value that is used in resale or breaking those down for parts. It comes into a pot, and then you've got some money there to then buy new refurbed or whatever it is you want to do. So you retain back some of that value to be able to get your next lot of devices through. And we know devices, get old pretty quickly. If schools, for me, knew a little bit more about that and made wiser, more conscious decisions, we would have a less of a gap, I think.
And that's the thing right now. So
Yes.
so we need to bang the drum for that a little bit.
Yes,
we might
please.
even get you back on just to talk about that. And I guess for the process, or for what we're going to be talking about and what we are talking about today, I guess the utopian vision is that the devices you give out there have SIMs in them or connectivity that of the light of what ATP Enable and Digital Link have created, so protected SIMs. Because I guess from a council perspective, you have a huge duty of care, and then you're distributing those devices to maybe vulnerable people, or and you need to make sure they're staying the right side of the line. Richard, I know this is something you're very passionate about, but that's obviously the key driver from your perspective from ATP Enable, yeah?
It's our USP. I mean, if you're taking a standard network operator SIM, put it politely, they do the bare minimum. They do what they can and what they're obligated to do legally we go above and beyond to create a product that meets the needs. Again, as you say, Graham, incredibly passionate about it, because I go back to being a dad, and I would be absolutely horrified if a device was provided by my kid's school and I saw them having access to material they shouldn't be, or contacted by somebody they didn't know, which is in the paper every day.
It's a constant worry.
Yeah, I would be horrified. So,
but that's how the commercial world works. So any family can go and walk into a provider of that technology, buy a SIM, give it to the child, and there is no protection. There is nothing there to protect that. But obviously, because it's being supplied by Essex County Council, you have to say, well, we apply best practice in ensuring the safety of those people in those households, not to access the wrong type or age inappropriate content.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll take that one, Jess. I suppose they do the best they can, because the resource isn't endless.
Yeah.
And as we said before about hovering over children to watch what they're doing, you can only do so much. So you can educate the parents, say, look, they shouldn't be doing this, they shouldn't be doing this. There are these preventions in place. This gives you something and gives you the ability to apply for jobs, learn digital skills, do all the great things that they do at the council. But they can only educate so much. We can go that extra layer to say, well, there is a way of stopping it completely. But again, openly, we've spoken about this many a time. Yes, there is a cost, but what's the cost of a child's life that?
And that we were talking earlier about that real emotional, that limbic development, that emotional development, and the impacts that has on a child at those very key influential stages, and may not even manifest itself until later on in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the real scary thing. I want to come back to the fourth utility thing, because you spoke. I love this idea. I love this concept. So, but that can't be commercial. That's got to be in the public sector.
That's got to be a top-down decision. Absolutely,
it has.
It's got to be central government.
Yeah. There's lots of conversations, isn't there, about utilities and services, and they should be renationalised. We can't put that out to the private sector, because, as you rightly said, it's just going to be overly commercialised.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So the utopian vision is that, and so let's lobby that for policy. Let's lobby that for consideration.
Yeah.
I guess that's going to be quite a hard job.
Super difficult, absolutely, because the age-old problem will come back to money.
Of course it will.
If we think about things like, so I'll come back to you on prevent duty. Give me a prod. But if we think about things like the NHS app. Now, we absolutely do need it. Brilliant, fantastic. It was well used during COVID because we had to do it.
Yeah.
Like we had to, it was a slightly different thing that we were doing, but it was mandated. Everybody had to use this COVID app. So we all had it. And I'd forgot it was on my phone, to be honest, until I got a thing to say, take it off. The NHS app comes in. And again, we talk about infrastructure, right? So we've got this massive push to get, I think it's something like 90% of residents in the UK, patients, using the NHS app so they can get access to online consultations, potentially, repeat prescriptions, their records, all of those fabulous, wonderful things.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
How many, so if we're talking about skills, I would love to commission a piece of research that looks at how many of the essential digital skills from the Essential Digital Skills Framework you need to access that NHS app. And then I could take that back and say, so guys, this amazing app that you've developed, we've got 6.9 million people currently offline in the UK who lack some of those basic digital skills, and you've created an app that needs 24 of them. We've got a problem. That's the first thing that I would do there. But coming back to you on the things that you're doing, Essex County Council, all local authorities, all universities, all schools have to do prevent duty training. So this is a piece where we make sure that we are trained to spot potential radicalisation, any of those types of things happening. And for me, that would be the bit that your amazing SIM card could really make a difference in.
It's safeguard.
Because it's hard to spot. A lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes. But if you've got a SIM card that can do that for you and create that barrier between these things happening and somebody going from this to this, and it happens very quickly.
Yeah, it's real time.
That's incredible. And I absolutely love that as a concept. So let's take this offline later and talk about it.
Well, so the final question I'm going to ask you, because we're going to wrap up on time a bit. So, Jess, let's look at, and you might have just covered a bit of this off, but let's look at future truths. What would the utopian future look like for you? What would, when you finish your work and with all your colleagues and all the collaborations you're doing, what would you like to see? You know, at your retirement party.
Oh.
You know, what
I'm hoping 55.
What would you have liked to seen happen? What would be the ideal outcome for you?
So at the moment, digital inclusion is everybody's problem and no one's responsibility. So I'd want to change that. So we should all be speaking the same language. Businesses, education, all of us know that digital inclusion is something that we absolutely have to work with, work around, support, have the infrastructure. I'd want to really, really move the needle and make sure that we are really considering carefully things that we put in place. If we are creating a digital first nation, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure. I keep coming back to that word, the infrastructure behind it. And when I say infrastructure, I mean money and the people to be able to make that happen. So digital equity is my utopian vision. And I would hope, but by the time I'm retired, that Amin has done an amazing job and got us to that. But that would be where I would want. So it's like a parity, like making sure that we all have access to these things online and sort of getting the most out of that. That would be what I would hope for. It's probably way too big of a vision, but...
Well, we can see today on this podcast you've demonstrated obviously that passion and that vision, and you are delivering on that journey. So you know, we wish you well, and I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast today does as well. Thanks very much. You guys have been great as usual. It's been great to talk about this. We are going to talk about this a little bit more. We're going to get you back on a podcast with Paul Finnis, and we're going to. I don't think there's going to be enough time. I think we better set 2 hours for that one. But it's been really great having you on today, both of you.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you,
me.
and we'll see you all again next time.